Hello everyone, it's Merlin here, and I've got something rather interesting to talk to you about today, and that would be my recent experience watching Thor: The Dark World. And I've got a lot of mixed feelings about the movie, so I'm going to try and start with the pros, and then talk about the cons. I did enjoy this movie, I think in terms of just being a fun, popcorn, loving, action movie. I think it's a decent blockbuster. I mean, it's not a bad movie, and I want to stress that to people. It's not a bad film, definitely. I think the strongest things about the film are definitely Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston as Thor and Loki. I think they have great chemistry, and I think that the writers really did a good job of focusing on trying to build their growth as characters, their bond, just their struggle to kind of work out their relationship as brothers despite having some issues in the past. And I think it really does follow both the first Thor movie and the Avengers pretty well. I really have to say that in terms of the action sequences in the movie, it is pretty good. The special effects work is for the most part decent. It's a good looking movie. The costume design and set design, as in the first movie, was good. I didn't like some of it as much as in the first movie, but overall I still think it had a pretty good set piece overall. So the movie looked good, and I think that the editing for the action sequences, particularly towards the last act of the movie, were really awesome. I think the last fight scene was fun. Was definitely the highest point in the movie. And those are the primary pros I can think of, honestly. So as you can imagine, there's probably going to be some more cons for me. The biggest thing I had a problem with in this movie was I felt that there was no real sense of danger for the heroes. Now admittedly, with Thor and with a lot of these Marvel Studios movies, it is good to have fun with these characters. And Marvel is good at demonstrating that they can have fun. Ultimately, that's the point of the comic book movie. However, there's always a point, particularly in the Iron Man movies, where the villain really does bring things into a more serious tone for a little while. There's a point where the heroes are in danger, and we feel that. That's why there's a movie. We actually have to see these characters go through something, struggle, and then come out of it okay because we like them. But in order for that to be successful, we need to have a villain who seems threatening and, actually provide some sense of danger. Malefic is this dark elf leader who apparently tried to send the universe into darkness by using this thing called the ether, which was like this elemental totem of black energy, and he would bring the world back to the era of darkness and basically turn the universe into this incredibly evil, vile place, basically before time was time. So apparently Bor, Odin's father, defeated him, apparently by causing all the elves to commit suicide because they were losing the battle, even though I don't think they really were. And basically, Christopher Eccleston, who plays the villain, he goes into hiding for a long period of time, just lying dormant until it's ready, time for him to strike. And he comes back, and the thing about it is, I really like the actor that portrayed him, and he honestly is an interesting villain in the comics. I've seen him done better. In the Avengers Mightiest Heroes cartoon from a couple years ago, he was actually in an episode, and I honestly think he was utilized better in that episode of that cartoon series than in this movie. Admittedly, he does look cool, and the actor does do a fairly good job with what little he is given, but there really isn't much motivation for the character. There isn't much backstory. There isn't even really that much interaction between him and the heroes. And what's worst of all is, he's supposed to be this really threatening villain with this really, really epic plan to basically unmake the universe, but we never really get the sense of that because whenever they fight him, they don't really show him as being much of a threat, and they kind of turn the whole thing into a fun ride. And it really never seems like Thor's in any danger, even though this is supposed to be, honestly, probably the most epic plot the movies have tried to pull off so far. And it just doesn't work, and I think that was a big problem. Now, I love Christopher Eccleston. He was the Ninth Doctor in Doctor Who. He did a great job with that character, and I've seen him in other films. He's a really good actor, and I felt like he just wasn't utilized properly. That was partially because of the writing of his character. So really, I think of all the villains, he might honestly be the most cliche, and really most forgettable. I think that's a shame. Another thing I didn't like is I thought that some areas of the budget were cut back, particularly with some of the costume choices. Like the Dark Elves, I felt that instead of giving them makeup to look more like their leader, which I thought would have been really awesome, they put all these weird masks that I thought you could find at any Halloween store, which I just didn't think really fit with the aesthetic of the Dark Elves. It just seemed kind of tacky to me. And there was one scene where Natalie Portman's character, Jane, is like using this scientific doohickey thingy, and it's obviously a graphing calculator. Now, if this was a B movie with like limited budget, I wouldn't mind that. I could, easily let it slide, and that'd be fine. But this is a big budget Marvel movie, and I mean, after all the Iron Man movies, they can do better than that. I'm like, come on, guys, try to hide it a little better. And admittedly, that's more of a nitpick, but I thought that elements like that were just kind of fluent throughout the movie, and that really annoyed me. I also felt that the movie tried to do certain things to make it more dramatic, but it didn't give enough time to let it sink in. It's like they wanted to have a fun time, but still have this dramatic, dark storyline. It just didn't work. Like, for instance, I won't spoil it, but there's a character who does something really, really awesome for the first time in the Thor movies, and you really like the character and want to get behind her, and, well, she dies. And it's supposed to be this moment of huge dramatic weight, and I talked to a couple other people, and they felt the same as me. Didn't really feel anything because we barely got to know the character. And then they tried to do something similar with another character, which would have really been awesome, but because of certain other things we've learned about previous movies, it didn't seem likely to happen. And the previous death made that even more obvious because they already had their dramatic death in the movie. So that wasn't handled very well either. I also will admit I did like the first Thor movie better, but my biggest problem with it was that I thought the romance, which was there, was the weakest element of the movie, and it was very underdeveloped. And I just didn't like the fact that they tried to make this Natalie Portman character, or this strong scientist lady, just kind of falling for Thor just because he's, the Norse god of thunder. And I guess you can make that argument, but it just made her seem like kind of a flat character. And they kind of took that element of the movie and made it the center of the plot for this movie. And admit, I think it's kind of working a little better, but I just don't really like the romance of the movie. I think it's pretty weak. Overall, I will say I did enjoy the movie, kind of, but not really. I of all the movies that I've seen from Marvel Studios thus far, and yes, that does include the Iron Man sequels, I honestly feel this was the one that left me feeling the most underwhelmed. I actually almost didn't like this movie. I had very mixed feelings about it. Some of the comedy elements kind of worked, and some of them didn't. They have some side characters there that they had these scenes which honestly could have been cut out of the movie. It's also really short. It's like under 2 hours, and I think that shows. Most Marvel movies are at least 2 hours, and they could have used that time to develop the villain more, develop the romance more, develop more time with Loki's character, because he really steals the show. So I just think it was really, really underutilized, and I feel like there were a lot of ideas for this film, and they just kind of wanted to rush it out there. And honestly, I feel like with Iron Man 3 and now Thor the Dark World, I'm beginning to think for Phase 2, it's been kind of a rocky start. So far, they've been underwhelming, and I'm beginning to worry if Marvel is dropping the ball a little bit. Hopefully, the Winter Soldier Captain America movie will help with that. Hopefully, Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man will start seeing something to get us excited for the next Avengers movie. But thus far, I'm honestly not certain. Beyond that, I don't know. I thought Thor the Dark World was enjoyable. I would probably give it a 6 out of 10, kind of like a B minus, I guess. I was bordering giving it like a C plus. It's definitely better than average movie. It's a fun, decent movie, and I admit that, but in terms of the bar that's been set by Marvel Studios' previous movies, including the Avengers, this really was honestly very close to being a cheesy, mediocre movie. The only real great strengths to it were just the acting by Hemsworth and Hiddleston and the development of Loki and Thor's character. And that is the strongest part of the movie, and that's really what holds it together. Plus, the third act does honestly get really fun, and there is some good action and good humor. But you really have to wait to get to the last half hour to really enjoy that. So, overall, if you're a fan of the movies, you're definitely going to see Dark World, but it doesn't really add anything particularly new. It does feel like it's probably the worst movie they've made thus far, in my opinion. So, unfortunately, those are my thoughts on the Dark World. I'd say check it out, but, just lower your expectations a little bit. But then again, there were some people that really liked it, so maybe it's just me. Alright guys, well, I'm going to get back to watching Game of Thrones, and yeah, Merlin out. Peace.